Hello, welcome back. It's Monday. I'm Mover. As you can see, I'm still in a hotel, but I thought we would talk about an accident investigation board report that recently came out on an F-15D, so the family model, that was involved in a mishap at Kingsley Field at Klamath Falls. That's the formal training unit for the F-15. And this happened in May of 2023. So it's taken a while for it to come out, but like we talked about before, we're not here to pass judgment on anybody or throw spears or anything like that, but for the grace of God go I, hoping to extract some lessons learned on this mishap and kind of talk about what could we do, what could we learn from it, what could we do better, what didn't work, what did work, stuff like that. Usually that's officially what an SIB is, a safety investigation board, and they pull lessons learned and pass it down, but it's all safety privilege information, so it's obviously not public. The AIB is the only thing that's public, and that is where they assign blame. So you can kind of see they're going to point fingers, but some of it may be valid, some maybe I don't agree with. So big picture overview. Last May, an F-15D was leading a four-ship with another F-15 and two F-35s. They were going out to do dissimilar basic fighter maneuvers, dogfighting. And on the way back, they flew low level. He got a hydraulic problem and he came back and everything seemed good when he landed, got the gear down. And then when his nose wheel touched down and he started trying to brake, the brakes failed. He called for the cable, but he said cable, and air traffic controller thought that meant lower the cable. So he lowered the arresting cable and the jet went off the end of the runway. A lot of people don't realize that fighters have tail hooks. People think, well, it's just Navy jets, which is not really true. I think there's only one Air Force fighter that doesn't have a hook, and that's the A-10. All the others do. The F-16 did. I did a barrier engagement cert back when I was an F-16 pilot at Avon Park as a new lieutenant, which was a lot of fun. We went out, I landed at Avon. They said, hey, here are the speeds we need to hit to certify this barrier. And you go to the end of the runway, you light the afterburner, see how fast you can get, rip it to idle, engage the cable, do that a couple times. It's a good time. But that cable is there. It's on both ends of the runway for this very purpose. If you have a brake failure, if you have something that happens that you don't think you can stop, you can always say cable, cable, cable. That's the correct terminology. And the cable will come up. There's also barriers, nets at other airfields, but the cable is pretty standard at all fighter bases. So we'll talk about that in the brief, but let's take a look at the AIB for educational purposes.
3, 2, 1, flight off.
All right, so here is the PDF on the AIB report. You can see it was an F-15D tail number 840046, which means it was funded in 1984. Usually the funding and the building is about the same time, so it's built in 1984. Pretty old jet. Here's the executive summary. On 15 May 2023, 1500 local time, F-15D assigned to Klamath Falls, failed to stop on the runway, impacted an irrigation canal. No fatalities. The mishap pilot was injured with non-life-threatening injuries, and it was a $35 million aircraft. They were going out to fight Fat Amy at the MOA, 100 miles northwest of Kingsley Field, return to base via low level. That sounds like an awesome day, right? Go out, beat up on Fat Amy, teach it what it's like to be defensive, because let's be realistic. Fat Amy is not doing well against an F-15. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. But good training for both, offensive for the Eagle guys, defensive for the Fat Amy pilots. While he was on the low-level route, they had a hydraulic malfunction, terminated the mission after landing, got the loss of normal braking, lowered the hook. Local tower controller misinterpreted the intent, lowered the departure and arrestment cable, and failed to make a successful barrier engagement. The board president found that by the preponderance of the evidence that the mishap was caused by the mishap pilot decision not to engage the emergency brake steer system, which we'll talk about via the checklist guidance, and also said secondary factors were ATC lowering the cable and maintenance personnel failing to perform required maintenance procedures, which we'll talk about. Maintenance had this whole thing where this jet hadn't flown in a while. It had previously had a utility hydraulic system problem, and they signed it off. without further investigation. In case you don't know what an Eagle jet looks like, that's it. Back 12, standard USAF operating arresting system. It's engaging devices, energy absorbers, bidirectional system employs 2 energy absorbers consistent of 2 multi-disc rotary friction devices. The bidirectional system employs 2 energy absorbers consistent of 2 multi-disc rotary friction brakes mounted on the opposite end of the runway. Can handle 60,000 to 140,000 pounds. It can be located anywhere on the runway. Usually there's a set of approach end and departure end, either 1 or 2. So here's what happened. Sounds like a glorious day. It was continuation training, which continuation training means non-student sorties. Remember, this is the F-15 basic course or the schoolhouse. They do transition courses too. Formal training unit, FTU. So they departed as a 4-ship, just rehacking, getting current, practicing on beating up on Fat Amy. They went to the airspace with the Mishap pilot leading in the D model, his wingman in a C model, and then 2 F-15 or 2 F-35s with him. The Mishap pilot was experienced, chief of safety with 3,300 flight hours. Everything was in the green. Pre-flight was good, except the Mishap aircraft on the 3rd of May had a hydraulic system maintenance and did not fly until that morning. So the morning of the mishap, 12 days later. The Mishap aircraft landed with no maintenance discrepancies on the first flight, but during the through flight inspection, maintenance personnel serviced the utility hydraulic system. It was configured for a standard training mission. Mishap pilot reviewed the aircraft forms and conducted the walk around. They took off at 2 o'clock. They rejoined for the dissimilar formation. They split in the airspace to do Fat Amy BFM, and then got back together to do a low level back home, which it sounds so awesome. That sounds like such a fun day. So unfortunately, his day wasn't so great after that, though, because he got the hydraulic system problem, illumination of a hydraulic light, utility B light on the hydraulic built-in test, and a right engine inlet light. They boarded the low level, initiated a return towards Kingsley Field, and his wingman did a battle damage check, which is you look at the other aircraft and see what's going on, panels, fluids, what's happening. But during the mishap wingman noted hydraulic fluid was leaking behind the right main landing gear door. So he said, hey, you got a hydraulic leak. But he looks at his gauge and says, well, it's still producing 3,000 pounds per square inch, which is the normal PSI for the hydraulic system. But they complied with all the initial checklist items for utility B hydraulic, declared an emergency with Seattle Center, and then requested to do a straight in at Kingsley Field rear runway 14. That's a 10,302 foot runway, and it's with 1,000-foot extended overruns. 2 back 12 aircraft arresting cables are located approximately 1,500 feet from either end. So you've got arresting cables. It's a long runway. Life's good. So they configured the aircraft, confirmed the landing gear was down, but then once the gear was down, he's trailing hydraulic fluid between the exhaust nozzles, noted the normal utility hydraulic pressure, relayed the safe landing configuration supervisor of flying. Supervisor of flying, typically sitting in the tower next to the controller, and is somebody that can read checklist, liaise with air traffic control, talk to ops, talk to maintenance. It's kind of your person on the ground that's helping you through this situation. Mishap pilot briefed the plan, via good CRM. Land on runway 14, and if abnormal braking was encountered, they would execute a go around and then do an approach end arrestment. So it's a more controlled engagement. It's got plenty of room. If it doesn't catch, the approach end arrestment was preferred in this case. On final, he was cleared to land, communicated that the departure end arrestment cable indicated up, meaning the cable was configured to catch the Mishap aircraft via the arresting hook. So at this point, life is good. You've got a cable at the end in case you can't stop. You got the ability to go around. There's so many different ways to safely terminate this that they're feeling pretty good about it. Touchdown on speed at 138 knots, approximately 850 feet down the runway. Can't get any better than that. 500 to 1,500 feet down the runway, on speed in the zone, looks good. Extended the speed brake, performed an aero brake to 100 knots, and then lowered the nose wheel. That's 2,500 feet down the runway. So you got plenty of runway left. I think life's looking good. After landing, the SOF communicated the Mishap pilot the speed brake did not fully extend. So the SOF is watching this from the tower and said, hey, it looks like your speed brake didn't fully extend. Mishap pilot applied brake pressure, but subsequently recognized that braking was insufficient to slow the Mishap aircraft. During the investigation board interview, the Mishap pilot was uncertain whether sufficient runway remained to safely execute a go-around and elected to continue the landing to attempt a departure end cable arrestment. Now remember, he briefed that if the brakes were bad, I'm going to go around. But at this point, he second guessed himself and said, I don't know if I have enough room. I'm just going to take the departure in cable because I got a hook. That's what it's for. Cable was up. Things are good. Now, here's where it gets kind of weird. He lowered the hook at 5,000 feet down the runway. So he's got 5,000 feet remaining and then plus the overrun, and transmitted cable on tower frequency, non-standard comm. The correct term is cable, 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 but it just said cable. You would think that's okay, that's enough. Unfortunately, ATC misunderstood that radio call and lowered the cable. What happened next is they lowered it and said cable coming down on the frequency. The AIB did confirm the Mishap pilot intended for them to engage. So the intent was cable meant keep the cable up. But instead, at 78 knots at 3,500 feet runway remaining, the Mishap pilot transmitted, no, I need cable, cable up, cable up, cable up, cable up. So now we're focused on this back and forth between the air traffic controller and the pilot. 4 seconds later, activated the switch to raise the cable and responded cable up. Too much time. It takes time for that cable to raise. I forgot how many seconds, but it's like 4 or 5 seconds. It takes a little bit. But so you got the reaction time, the clarification time, the reaction time, and then the time for the cable to come up. Too late. So the Mishap aircraft crossed the departure into cable arrestment point at 72 knots with 1,500 feet remaining. Shortly thereafter, the Mishap pilot transmitted no cable, indicating an unsuccessful departure. I've never heard that one before. And to minimize the probability of blown tires, the checklist cautions against engaging the emergency brake system above 70 knots, recommends initial light brake pressure, which was at 72 knots. The Mishap aircraft exited the runway on the extended overrun at 62 knots. Mishap pilot intentionally veered to the right to avoid the instrument approach lighting system located in the extended overrun center line and departed the prepared surface at 57 knots. So remember we talked about it on a previous episode, aircraft hit that and it really mangled the gear. That is not a forgiving. There's a big tall antennas. It's not something you want to hit. It's not going to feel good. Now at this point, I'm thinking if I'm departing the prepared surface, at least as an F-16 pilot, I'm jumping out because F-16s especially, now this is an F-15, so I don't know how they're trained or what they think about, but just me as an F-16 guy or maybe even F-18, I'm thinking jumping out because if the jets, hit something, flips upside down, now I'm stuck upside down and, I'm probably going to die. So I'm thinking departing the prepared surface at this speed, I'm out. See you later. But the pilot sticks with it. 4 seconds later, the Mishap aircraft struck a raised retention berm on the north side, where momentarily became airborne and impacted the south side berm of the irrigation canal. 15 degrees nose low, 20 degrees right bank, traveling approximately 49 knots on impact. So that's a head-on collision in a car at 60 miles an hour. There you go. And then he landed in the irrigation canal. Egress with no problems, no damage to the AFE. They were on scene almost immediately, brought him to the emergency room and said, okay, you got non-life-threatening injuries, which I can imagine. I mean, geez. So the maintenance, what they had done was on 3 May, they had a ground abort for right-hand utility hydraulic pump or right-handed utility pump failure. And they did operational tests and returned the Mishap aircraft to service, replaced the right-hand utility pump, 2 utility accessory manifold return filters, and 1 utility accessory manifold supply filters. Conducted an entire utilities hydraulic system flush and on-site leak and operational tests to determine the integrity and serviceability of the replaced part. Following the unscheduled maintenance, the Mishap aircraft did not fly for 12 days. After the first flight, maintenance personnel reported a possible utility system hydraulic leak during the through-flight inspection. To identify the source, maintenance removed door 88 right to access the utility hydraulic reservoir and service the system. They did not fully exhaust all measures to confirm the existence of a leak and performed an exceptional release, deeming the aircraft flightworthy. Review of the 781 on the day of the mishap determined maintenance personnel did not document the utility hydraulic servicing procedures or the removal of door 88 right. Not good. It's got a fuel oil heat exchanger, and that's what failed. It was a crack near a weld on the forward outboard housing near the utility outlet port. Confirmed that was the source, no other leaks. Cannot be isolated or result in total utility hydraulic system failure. The rate of hydraulic fluid loss will be significantly higher if the thermal control valve is open. When utility hydraulic fluid exceeds 225 degrees Fahrenheit, all fluid will be routed to the heat exchanger for maximum cooling. The structural crack led to a catastrophic leak and a total system failure. But they said if he had done the emergency braking, those accumulators, which do the JFS, jet fuel starter, and emergency brakes, they were charged at 3,000 PSI, it would have functioned properly. So It was a VFR day, 19010, gust 17, 10 miles, 8,000 feet scattered. Looked nice. Mishap pilot was super experienced and had been flying a lot, medically qualified with no issues. The crew rest was not an issue. Supervision was not an issue. Here's the human factors that they talk about. I would add normalization of deviance, and I'll get to that in a second when they talk about it. But statement of opinion. Here's why they said it didn't work. Basically, if the Mishap pilot had done the Mishap aircraft emergency brake steer system checklist and used that below 70 knots, it would have worked out great. That's the board president's opinion. So the cause, the first thing, didn't engage the brake steer system. And the reason for that, I mean, they went to the simulator and said, okay, he noticed it at 90 knots and assessed braking action was insufficient. He was uncertain whether go around was safely executable in the remaining runway. This right here is kind of where I think we started to fall apart, because we briefed a plan. And then when they actually got down to executing the plan, we were unsure of the plan and didn't do the plan. So I think, once he landed, things are looking good, gets a little bit of a, okay. And then the nose wheel comes down. Now it's like, okay, well, I still got the cable. I can take the arrested landing, versus I briefed that if I don't have braking, which is a possibility, I'm going to go around and take an arrested landing. So they went in the sim, because when he was interviewed, he said, I didn't think I had enough room. And they basically said, if he had done an afterburner go around, we could have done it in mill power and still worked. But if he'd done an afterburner, it would only taken him 1,000 feet with 5,000 feet of runway remaining by the time he did the go around where he did it. I mean, you're in a cleanish F-15. I mean, it's a rocket ship, man. Take it, go airborne, go flying again. You're safe for flying. Instead, decided to change the plan, take the departure end cable, which is valid. That's a valid plan, and you would expect that the cable's up because the guy said departure end cable indicates up. So once he was committed to that landing, then it says put the hook down, and he did that. First step in the loss of brakes checklist, lower the arresting hook. However, when ATC lowered the departure end arrestment cable, the only remaining option to stop was to engage the emergency brake system. So the cable was there, but then that communication thing happened with ATC. The last option to not go off-roading was the emergency brake. Basically, they said two factors drove that course of action. One, it says at 70 knots, you have an increased possibility of blown tires and loss of directional control, which is bad, which is what he had anyway. It also states light brake pedal pressure should be applied initially to develop a feel for effective braking, because you don't have any skid. You lose that. But as I flew T-38s, we didn't have any skid ever, and it worked out great. So they went and looked, and if he'd had traveled at 72 knots with 1,500 feet remaining, it would have stopped successfully. But the reason that he had that when they interviewed him is because previously he had an issue with emergency braking and knew somebody that had popped tires. During the AIB interview, the Mishap pilot described being involved in a previous F-15C loss of brakes incident where use of emergency brake steering resulted in blown tires. So, our experience dictates a lot of what we do. And he's sitting here thinking, well, if I'm at this speed, I pull this, I'm going to blow both tires and make off the end of the runway. So, but I think it goes farther back to when he's arguing with the controller about, no, I need the cable. Do you need the cable? Oh, I need the cable. Like, I think, you've got an OODA loop, right? And I think once something breaks you out of that, it's very hard, especially with things happening as fast as they are, to get back in and go, what's my next procedure? When they talk about substantially contributing factors, so they're saying this is not the cause, but substantially contributed. According to the air traffic controller's testimony, pilots assigned to the 173rd Fighter Wing commonly request to lower the departure end arrestment cable after landing to minimize wear on the cable when taxiing over it on the runway. Although this practice was not specified in the local area operations, ATC-1 stated that when the Mishap pilot transmitted cable on the radio, ATC-1 perceived the Mishap aircraft had safely landed and interpreted the Mishap pilot's transmission to mean the Mishap pilot did not need the cable and wanted it lowered. ATC-1 also testified that once the Mishap aircraft landed, focus shifted to the wingman and other aircraft in the pattern. The ATC-1 did not recognize that the arresting hook had been deployed, which should have indicated the departure end arrestment was imminent. Additionally, Mishap pilot did not use correct terminology to indicate a departure end arrestment. In accordance with 11.2 F-15 Vol 3, cable is correct, not just cable. Considering the mishap aircraft was an emergency with hydraulic system malfunction, ATC-1 should have queried the mishap pilot to ensure cable was correctly understood, but had the mishap pilot made a clear statement of intent with prescribed procedures, it is likely the departure and arrestment cable would remain in a raised position. Also, if he just said nothing. He later transmitted, no, I need the cable up, but it was too late at that point. So I don't know that I agree with the assessment here. And I guess I have more questions than anything. First, the air traffic controller says it's the standard was to minimize wear. They lowered the cable so the taxi over. Okay, I buy that. It's weird, but I buy that. Were they calling cable to tell ATC to lower the cable? Because if not, this is nonsense, right? Because if your call is cable and ATC lowers the cable, that's bad. If they were saying something else, then this air traffic controller he's out to lunch. On the other hand, if they were saying cable, well, this is a normalization of deviance because your emergency call is cable, just like barrier for back 15. So why would you ever normalize saying the word cable? It's like the whole eject versus bailout thing, or, emergency versus non-normal. Like, why would you normalize saying a word that's part of an emergency call? Because the call is cable, I raise the cable. Well, one cable should not make you lower the cable. Like, no amounts of cable should make you lower the cable. So I don't know that I buy this, because let's look at situational awareness. He knows he's got a mishap aircraft. And at least in my experience, when you declare an emergency and are landing as an emergency aircraft, even if it's a fuel emergency, the only person that can terminate it is the fire chief. Fire chief will show up, talk to you on the radio, and clear it and cancel it. Like, I've had emergency fuel. I landed, had plenty of fuel to taxi back, and I still had to talk to fire and rescue. So somebody was meeting him, and more than likely, with no nose wheel steering, because it's a hydraulic problem, you're going to shut down that runway. So they're going to get towed back. So I don't know why you'd be taking your attention off until the fire trucks have met that aircraft and it's shut down. Second, the SOF, presumably, I don't know how their situation is, but typically the SOF is sitting right next to them. So the SOF maybe should have intervened right there too, because the supervisor of flying should have heard him go, okay, or looked at him, seeing him flip the switch and go, what are you doing? Stop that, put that back up. Don't touch that. He needs that cable. Look, he threw the hook down. So there's a little bit of communication between those two that might have helped as well. But the big thing is, either we're normalizing a term that is not, or we're just not using common sense. Because to me, you've got an emergency aircraft that says cable. I mean, come on, it's cable. The cable needs to come up. You've already said cable indicates up. We know it's an emergency. I don't buy that we're worried about saving the cable at this point during an emergency, especially when the SOF's already keyed up and said, hey, your speed brake didn't come up all the way. Okay, hey, that's a hint. Something else is going on. But again, it's always the Swiss cheese model. You can't throw the ATC person under the bus as well, because if you go back, if he'd have just lit the blower and gone around, he could have taken an approach end cable, right? Or if after that he'd done the emergency brakes, that would have worked too. But I really think that departure end cable should have been there. It doesn't check with me. Things are happening fast, right? Landing, okay, things are going well. Startle factor, brakes aren't working. Okay, cable, he's busy. The call might have gotten clipped. You don't know, but now the controller responds, okay, cable down. That's taken him out of whatever he's got to think of next, because now he's got to think of what to communicate, how to communicate, and telling the controller, dude, it just takes brain bites. It takes brain bites to take yourself out of that situation and argue with the controller about whether or not that cable needs to be up. So, yeah, I think, then you go to law of primacy and you go, okay, well, last time I had this situation, or I saw this situation at 70 knots, the brakes popped and they lost directional control. So things are happening fast. I think number one, go around. Number two, the cable should have been up. And then finally, the whole thing with the emergency brakes. So then they go to maintenance and they say, well, the maintenance personnel failed to perform adequate troubleshooting on the aircraft hydraulic system, identified present hydraulic fluid on door 88 behind the right main landing gear, which, lo and behold, that's where the leak was. They opened door 88 to search for the leak and did not fully implement procedures for pressurizing a system hydraulic. It had only flown once in 12 days. Once they found fluid, this should have indicated that there was a problem and isolated the leak. Then it would have been non-mission capable. It wouldn't have flown. They would have done the proper maintenance. I'm not going to throw maintenance under the bus. That's not my wheelhouse. I don't know. I always trusted the jets that they gave me, but you would hope that they would comply with their tech orders and see that and try to troubleshoot it. The problem is, look at the number, 840046. Jets are old, and you're trying to keep old jets flying. This is why I always advocate for we need to buy new jets, and they don't need to be 5th gen. They just need to be 4th gen jets that are capable. Newer jets have fewer problems. Older jets, you're just trying to keep them running. So we have these issues, but if they had done the procedures, might have worked out a little bit better. At the end, the conclusion is if he didn't do the emergency brake steer system, that would have fixed it. Again, AIB has to assign blame. They're not going to say no one's at fault. So take that for what you will. I think we can get some lessons learned here. Clear, concise, correct, calm, with the cable. Formulating a plan when you're low stress and then executing it under high stress, i.e. the go around, might have been a little bit better, sticking to that plan. And then normalization of deviance. If the common call is cable and that makes them lower the cable, that's a problem. That's not a standard procedure. That's not in accordance with any local area procedures. And then when the controller gets confused because we have communication issues, they lowered it when they actually needed it. So I think we need to make sure we're always saying the correct terminology and we don't get into a situation like this. But again, but for the grace of God, go I. All right, so that's it on the mishap review on this F-15. I think a lot of good lessons learned here. And, I don't know, we never find out what happens to the pilot. I'm sure he's back flying. I don't think this is something that would permanently ground somebody, but I think it's good that we learn from it. Remember, clear, concise, correct, calm, use what's appropriate. It's unfortunate we lost an aircraft, but it's still good that the pilot was able to safely egress and there was no loss of life or anybody seriously injured. And hopefully that pilot's flying again. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.